claimed to have found a great onyx cave. And of course, looking at the postcards, you could see the great onyx cave was found and opened by L.P. Edwards, who was a preacher at the time. And this story, which was little more than a rumor, as far as I was concerned, was that somehow Turner had found his way from Salt's Cave into Great Onyx Cave. Now, you just have to take my word for it. Hell will freeze before that takes place.
So that's not true.
So, I don't believe it is. The story, well, I printed it, so it must be.
Well, yeah.
Well, the story is that L.P. Edwards had this farm, and that Edmund Turner came along and said, I think I can find a cave on your place, and can I have half interest in it if I find it? And that L.P. Edwards said, go ahead and look. Yes. So, lo and behold, in 1915, Great Onyx Cave comes to be. And one of the pieces of confetti that I'm picking up in roots of the cave, I learned today, or on my family. That was a postcard with L.P. Edwards and Edmund Turner, Great Onyx Cave, you see. So obviously, Edmund Turner was some kind of a partner at one time of L.P. Edwards. Now, what about the promise of half the proceeds? Well, presumably there was a great falling out. And Edmund Turner presumably said, well, you'll never find the main part of Great Onyx Cave because I have sealed up the passageway. Now, there's a lot of stories like that around here. So that, but on the other hand, one could do it. There are some places. And in fact, 2 years ago, we crawled up into a place and there's Edmund Turner in Great Onyx Cave. So, at any rate, Edmund Turner fell sick because, L.P. Edwards had said, presumably, well, I didn't mean you could have half of a big cave like the one I've got here, but, you know, if we got our way into some little cave, you broke off some stalactites and sold them, I would split the proceeds with you. Well, that was, from Turner's point of view, the story. At this point, Edmund Turner, this is 1917, falls ill and dies, a penniless pauper. A pauper without even enough money to buy a coffin. The story is that the guides at Mammoth Cave took pity on him and took up a purse and went around to his friends and went around to L.P. Edwards and said, will you contribute a little money so that we can give him a decent burial? And L.P. Edwards was said to have replied, I won't give a dime, not a dime! And of course, as a historian, he used that kind of emphasis. And everybody, we know that's true because everybody on Flint Ridge heard this story and said, you know, imagine him being a preacher and all. But they never knew why. Is this just gypping somebody out of a cave? I mean, there must have been bad blood. Well, one of these pieces that's now starting to come out, we were shown today the grave, former grave of one of L.P. Edwards' daughters, Cova Edwards. And Cova Edwards, however, is not buried in her grave. She was exhumed and removed to Cave City by L.P. Edwards. Of course, everybody knows L.P. Edwards had two daughters. One is Lucy, who married Perry Cox, probably the brightest woman in all of Kentucky. I mean, that's my opinion. She was an entrepreneur. She was an entrepreneur, a delightful person, that she could run a cave better than anybody. But anyway, Cova, mystery person, I learned today, that she became pregnant without being married, and that probably, another piece of confetti, probably L.P. Edwards was pissed off that his partner was the suspect in this. There we have plausibility. Is this history? I don't know. I'm just telling you these little pieces. And that L.P. Edwards said, discovering this later, well, my daughter's not going to be married in the same graveyard, the Mammoth Cave Church graveyard, as this godless, heathen, pagan Edmund Turner. So he dug her up and had her moved. So that the pieces are starting to come together.
Wow.
Now you say, is this the way history's done? Well, that's why we are all together, because we are bound by an attraction going back over centuries to one of the most significant caves in the whole world. And families who grew up here either were involved in the caves, as Lee, the Lee family, and many others, or just had farms on top of it. They're all tied together in a network. So we are all somehow related, either by interest, by genetics, by whatever, and certainly by curiosity. I think we all would want to know all these stories. I'll stop at this point.
Let's go back to the historic record just a minute. Edmund came, and Norman and Fred will give you some of the facts. But he came here just downstream of on the Green River was Ganter Cave that had been opened commercially to stop that people coming up from steamboats could see Ganter Cave. Turner's first cave that he opened wasn't Great Onyx. He first opened Dawsey Domes Cave. If you go down the bottom of the hill, down below Mammoth Cave entrance, you go down where the county road went. If you stand there right at the river's edge, you can see the entrance across the river of Dawsey Domes Cave. It's about 150 feet long. He had a nice brochure, and Gordon probably has some of the brochures for Dawsey Domes Cave. That's the first commercial cave that Edmund Turner opened. And the interesting thing were the hours. Back then, all the cars, they didn't use the current ferry. They went down past Mammoth Cave. They used the ferry to cross, and then would have to angle hard up the hill to the right to go on to Maple Springs. And that entrance was right there when you pulled your car across. So Dawsey Domes Cave was open. His hours were of interest. It was open. It was $1 for your tour, and it was open between 8 and 10 and 3 and 6. I have no idea what he did the rest of the time. Maybe that's when the ferry ran, Norman. So that's one of the questions we want to ask. So, Fred, go ahead.
Or was he carrying on?
That's a good thought. Well,
Let me introduce Fred Douglas. Fred Douglas signed up as a little boy for the speleology course and took the course. He was one of the star pupils because he was interested not only in the cave, but Edmund Turner. And of course, I took him over and showed him where Ellis Jones had showed me where Edmund Turner was buried. At that time, there were 2 sandstone rocks off at the edge of the cemetery. It seemed to me that was going to be lost one day, so I made sure that my students would see this cemetery, the Collins relatives, and Edmund Turner's unmarked grave. I'll take it from there.
Edmund was born in 1876 in Buffalo, New York. His family was a railroad family. They all worked for the railroad. He had several brothers, one sister. Most of them worked for the railroad in Buffalo. Was a major rail center. And he didn't want to do that. Edmund didn't want to do that. He did not go to college at Rensselaer. He essentially worked on the railroad for some time. All the bridges, catwalks, and Dawsey Domes he built. And he must have learned his skills while working on the railroad and stuff like that, because they're always building bridges and things. As far as him expressing an interest in coming down here to open up a commercial cave on his own. I don't know what spurred him to do that. But he did come down here in the middle 1890s on several trips. I stayed here at the old hotel and did exploring, and he met Floyd Collins on one of those trips. And when Floyd was a young child at that time. And coming back up to New York. At that time, he was living in New York City, and he was married, and he had 3 daughters. And I think that they were born between 1900 and 1910, these 3 daughters. Elise, Alice, and Mary are their names. I have never found anything on the wife. Who knows what happened? Divorced? Did she die? I don't know. Anywhere I've searched, I can't find it. Anyway, so he comes down around 1909, 1910 to this country, expressed interest to open up a commercial cave, and like Stan suggested, he opened up Dossie Domes. Obviously, there was a glowing hole that everybody knew about by the Cruder Dossie store, and he made a deal with Cruder, and yeah, go ahead, open it up. And he hired Floyd Collins, Bessie Blair to help him open up this passage into the little cave. And it was, well, I wouldn't call it successful by any means, but, you know, it made $1 or $2 on it. And in addition to the cave tour, he had what they called the cliff walk. And it was just like a walk around the river bluff, and that was probably part of the package, you know, so that, he had that going. And at that time, he was staying with Floyd Collins out at Lee Collins Farm out on Flint Ridge. $250 a week, I understand, room and board. And
That's $2.50 a week.
yes,